Imagine arriving at a desolate lighthouse on a remote island in the middle of a storm. And the wind howls through the cliffs, the sea crashes against the rocks, and yet everything feels unnaturally still. And as you climb the lighthouse stairs, you notice that the door is ajar. And inside, the clock has stopped. The table is set for a meal that no one has touched. And the only sign of life is this quiet chirp of a caged bird. So what could have driven this disaster? The answer may be far darker than anyone can imagine. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to MrEFiles. My Midnight Mafia crew, I just want to say thank you guys, and I hope you truly enjoyed Hell Month. And I already am writing stories for next year's Hell Month. I'm telling you, it's going to be a tradition forever. But we are still in YouTube purgatory. If you look at Hell Month from just last month to Hell Month a year ago, our views have been cut by 300% and our likes by the same. So we got to get this out there, and you can do that by just hitting the like button for me. I will truly appreciate it. And also hit the like button if you want me to release next week on Friday. This should have been on Friday, but it's been a crazy week. The craziest story that I've came across in the last 6 months. I was going to do it today, but I had to ask you guys, do you want to see it? If you do, hit that like button. But that's all, so without any further ado, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. So picture this. It's December in the year 1900, and 3 men are stationed at a lighthouse on the remote Flannan Isles, which is far off the rugged coast of Scotland. The weather, you could say, is truly fierce. The seas are treacherous, and the lighthouse standing tall against the brutal Atlantic storms. It's their lifeline. And James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur were tough men. No strangers to the rough, isolated life on these islands. And it was their job to keep that light burning, guiding ships safely past the jagged rocks. But something happened. And whatever it was, it left the lighthouse dark and the men gone. You see, lighthouses, before electronic navigation equipment became available, were very important because of navigation. Lighthouses were used to identify shorelines and shoals, and to guide ships into and out of the harbors. Plus, it served as a warning, because lighthouses warned mariners of dangerous coastlines, shoals, and reefs. And by the year 1900, nearly 1,000 lighthouses had been built in the United States. Okay, so on December 26th, a day after Christmas in 1990, after no signals were seen from this lighthouse for days, a ship called Hesperus was sent in to investigate. And when the vessel approached the island, the captain noticed something very strange. You see, the lighthouse itself wasn't lit, which was a very ominous sign. I mean, normally the keepers would be waiting there to, greet the ship, but there wasn't a soul in sight. So at this point, relief keeper Joseph Moore was then sent ashore as kind of a scout to, check out what was going on and make sure that everything was okay. So he climbed the steep steps to the lighthouse, his boots echoing on the cold wind as he ascended. And when he reached the top, what he found sent a chill down his spine, because the door was unlocked, and inside everything was eerily still. Imagine you being that person, and as he stepped inside the threshold of the door, he saw the ominous sign of the clock on the wall just stopped. Not to mention, whatever happened seemed to happen in a hurry, because the table was set up for this nice meal that the men were about to eat. But the food was untouched and the men were gone. And the fire, you could tell, was going at one point, but had now gone cold. So where were the men? Well, believe it or not, this story is actually one of the greatest mysteries of our time, which is why I thought I would have it in my Rolodex. I mean, it goes along other notable mysterious stories such as the Dyatlov Pass itself and others, because the men were nowhere to be found. And the only sign of life was that little bird, and it was a canary, sitting silently in its cage. More at this point did not stick around to look through things and investigate, because if you could imagine, the vibe was truly ominous and scary, and he knew that something was horribly wrong. So at this point, he's rushing back to the ship, and that's when he reported this unsettling scene, and that's when 2 more sailors joined him for a search on the island. But their efforts only deepened this mystery. Now remember, this was the year 1900, and one strange detail stood out. A set of oilskins, which is heavy-duty protective clothing, and it was still hanging right by the door. And absolutely no lighthouse keeper would leave this lighthouse during a storm without it. But things seemed as if at least one of them had ventured out, unprepared for the fierce weather. So the search continued along the western side of the island. And this, as you could imagine, is where the sea just lashed against the cliffs. And it was here, actually, that they found signs of destruction. These strong iron railings were twisted as if Superman just went like that. Plus, a boulder had been dislodged from its resting place. Plus, a supply box had been smashed open. Its contents were just thrown across the ground. But still, at this point, no trace of the men, no single body, not a single clue. So what do you think the official report was? A storm or something else? Well, as you know, this channel is about finding out what that something else could be. And if you love the mysterious and twisted, make sure to hit that like button right now. But at this point, the Northern Lighthouse Board sent their superintendent, Robert Muirhead, to investigate. And I mean, Muirhead had personally known these men. He even recruited them for the job. And he was actually the last person to see them alive when he visited the island just weeks before their disappearance. And do you want to know what his conclusion was? His conclusion was that he believed a massive wave, possibly a rogue wave, you might have seen them in the movies, usually like a 100-foot wave, like in the movie A Perfect Storm, just comes and tears up everything. So he thought a rogue wave, which just randomly happened in the ocean, which is very scary to think about, and they can be up to 100 feet tall, like I said. Well, yes, he actually thinks that one of these had swept the men right out to sea. And he speculated that Ducat and Marshall gone to secure this box of supplies during the storm, and MacArthur, seeing his colleagues in danger, rushed in to help. But then it would have been at that moment that a rogue wave, bigger than anything they had ever seen before, crashed right over the rocks, dragging all 3 men out into the freezing water. But there's something wrong about this speculation and conclusion, because you see, not everybody agreed with Muirhead's theory. I mean, and this is a huge thing, but for one, the direction of the wind at that time would have pushed the men back towards the island, not out to sea. So they would have been found on shore. Now, I almost want to repeat that again, because right there, that basically goes against his whole findings. That means that if the men somehow were actually hit by a rogue wave and thrashed out into the ocean, their bodies then would have been pushed back ashore. Thank you, physics. And the islanders, the locals from nearby villages, they had other ideas. And they believed that something far darker had happened, something sinister or supernatural. And over the years, rumors began to spread. Some said that a sea serpent, something that was ancient, massive, and hungry, had risen up from the depths and devoured the men whole. And the seas around Flannan Isles were known for their rough waters. But was there something actually huge and ancient lurking right beneath that surface? Some sort of creature that could snatch people off the cliffs without leaving a trace. Now, I know it might sound silly, but think about it. We know more about outer space than we do of the ocean. which is just absolutely crazy. And let's not forget, even in streams, rivers, and lakes, there's been crazy sightings of things like a couple weeks ago's episode, the Frogman on Shadows in the Wild, or let alone the Loch Ness Monster. So I mean, it sounds silly, but do you really think it's impossible? And then there were others who actually whispered about this phantom ship. This was a ghostly vessel that sailed the North Atlantic, taking men from lighthouses and remote islands, never to be seen again. I mean, was it a pirate ship, some long-lost crew of the damned returning to claim more souls for the sea? Well, I think this is one of the more far-fetched rumors, but let me know what you think in the comments below. And then, actually, this was a big one. There was the theory of foul play. And from a true crime perspective, this is where things get interesting. Because perhaps one of the men, driven mad by the isolation at this point, had turned on his companions. And when hearing a story like this, we think of three men and the bonds that they must have had doing this job together in such a lonely, desolate, and isolated place. And we'd like to think that humanity would not allow people to turn on each other. But it's a sad fact that we have seen it over and over again throughout history. So while this theory does crush the soul of the human spirit, it's definitely a possibility. Not to mention that Donald MacArthur was actually known for his fiery temper. So maybe he had attacked the others in a fit of rage and then flung himself into the sea out of guilt or despair. A lot of people have asked this question, but I might be the first person to ask a new question. I didn't hear anybody ask this. But if that's truly what happened, wouldn't all the men have ended up on shore because of the waves and the way the wind was blowing, just like with the rogue wave? I mean, it really makes you think, doesn't it? But maybe, just maybe, the most chilling theory is that the men weren't taken by sea or by madness, but by something from above. Yes, a lot actually believe that the men were abducted by a force far beyond our understanding. So could it have been a UFO coming down in the midst of a storm, which is perfect cover, right? Plucking the keepers from the rocks and then spiriting them away to some unknown place? I mean, 120 years later, the Pentagon has now confirmed that there are UFOs. And we've all seen the videos of them hovering over the water for some reason. They seem to love water, so think about that as well. And after all, there were absolutely no bodies, no signs of struggle, and nothing to suggest that they had drowned. They had simply vanished. And as strange as it sounds, the idea of alien abduction fits this eerie, unsolved nature of the case. The remote location, the wild storm, the complete absence of any clues, it all points to something far beyond the realm of the ordinary. Could it be that these men were taken by beings from another world? But over a century has passed since that fateful day in December 1900. And the Flannan Isles Lighthouse still stands, its light shining across the dark seas. But the mystery of what happened to James, Thomas, and Donald remains unsolved. There are no answers, unfortunately, but only questions. Did they fall victim to the fury of a storm, or was something far more sinister at play? Were they swept out to sea, or did something come to get them in the middle of the night? Something from the depths, or perhaps the stars? But one thing is for sure, whatever happened on that lonely island in the North Atlantic, we may never know. But the mystery of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers continues to haunt everyone who hears their horrific tale. And maybe one day we'll get to know the answer of what happened there. Either that, or we'll never know at all. But there are in life some things that we do know. And one of those is how a man ended up in a confined space that no man should ever end up in. And if you want to find out how he got there, you need to click on this story right now, right here. That's all I got for you guys today. I'll see you next time. Cheers.